Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. The time has come for Purdue to pursue the ultimate redemption. The Boilermakers are again a number one seed as they look to follow the path of 2019 Virginia and go from a historic loss to a historic triumph. We're going to look at Purdue's path to Phoenix here on the show today. We're going to analyze the Midwest region. What does Purdue have to do to reach its first Final Four since 1980. Going to look at some keys to victory as Purdue puts its dancing shoes on, plus a lot of your questions to answer and a few just general thoughts on this year's big dance to wrap things up today. It's the last episode before the tournament tips off for the Boilermakers on Friday. Let's get into it. If you don't already, be sure to follow on Twitter @BoilersBeyond. Come join the conversation there. There's going to be a lot to talk about here as the NCAA Tournament gets underway. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. No matter what happens, you're not going to want to miss the next episode or any episodes here as we talk about this season. It's tournament time now. This is kind of what everything has come down to for Purdue. It's been a really long wait for this point. Even though, I really pushed, try to enjoy the regular season because this is a really good Purdue team. This has always been lingering in the back of everyone's minds. And I think, to some degree, I'm sure it has been with the team as well. And now it's finally here. Purdue's the number one seed in the Midwest region, number 3 overall. I didn't know exactly what to expect when the selection show came on in terms of where Purdue would be between number 1 overall and number 3 overall. I think you can make a fine argument for any of them. I really do. I don't think it really mattered all that much. And I talked about that a bit Saturday night when we wrapped up the Big Ten tournament and looked ahead to the selection show. Purdue got what it needed. Purdue got the Indianapolis first and second round, then Detroit for the Sweet 16 Elite 8 if it can get that far. That's what you wanted. We could have looked back at the start of the season and that was what you wanted for Purdue was Indianapolis to Detroit. That's where Purdue's at now. So I think that means a lot more than, being 1 overall, 2 overall. It is what it is. It worked out really nicely this year where you had the top 3 teams that had really separated themselves all wanting to go to different regions. So it's not like it meant everything whether you were 1, 2, or 3. To a certain degree, if Purdue feels a little bit slighted being the number 3 overall seed, maybe that's a good thing. It's not a big secret that that's the type of stuff that this Purdue team kind of thrives off of. Purdue loves that, especially Braden Smith. Purdue loves feeling like it's disrespected, that it's not, that it's an underdog in some way. That's something that this Purdue team really kind of feeds off of. So if that's how Purdue feels, then I think that's a good thing. If you start to look at this draw in the Midwest region, it's pretty hard to be upset about Purdue's path. Now, I've learned my lesson over the last few years and really just through my 25 years as a basketball fan, but, especially the last few years, I've learned my lesson at getting too up or too down about a potential path to the Final Four. 2 years ago, I remember thinking that Purdue got a really tough draw with Kentucky as its 2 seed. But Kentucky loses to St. Peter's. It opens up for Purdue. The 1 seed up top was Baylor, who got knocked off by UNC. UNC was the 8 seed, made it to the second weekend, ultimately made it to the national title game. But, that things had opened up for Purdue that way. But Purdue ultimately didn't capitalize. And last year, it didn't look so great. That FAU-Memphis game was really concerning, but, ultimately it didn't matter. And that's kind of how this goes. You know, you kind of have to create your own luck to a certain degree. And if you play well, the path will normally take care of itself. You look at this first round game. Purdue gets a play-in game winner for the second straight year. Montana State versus Grambling State. Montana State's a small favorite at the sports book, I believe. We'll see. You know, I it's not like I've done a ton of research into these squads. You can look at their KenPom ratings. Neither of them are great. I have their sheets pulled up right here. There are, you know, some interesting nuggets, I guess, about both of them. But, you know, you don't take anything for granted. Montana State was the 5 seed in the Big Sky tournament and then got hot. So, you know, is it playing its best basketball right now? Probably. But it was still a 5 seed in the Big Sky tournament. Grambling is in the field for the first time ever. It's the third lowest KenPom team in the field. Plays at a really, really slow pace. So that's something that, you know, if that were to come to fruition, Purdue would have to deal with. Does not shoot a ton of threes. It does not shoot particularly well from 2-point range. Montana State does shoot fairly well, so it has that going for it. I think just on paper, Montana State looks a little better, but again, you know, I don't think there are some huge red flags in either of these matchups. You look ahead to a potential second round against Utah State, TCU. Neither of them are going to be pushovers by any means, but 8-9 games usually aren't. You know, you do the math on that, and that takes you inside the top 36 of teams nationally. So you're dealing with some fringe top 25 teams on the 8-9 line, maybe a little below. Not going to be pushovers. Utah State's 27-6, a really nice record on the year, has not played a single high major opponent. That's different. That's very different. You don't see that often, but that's part of being at that level of college basketball where you're not a power conference, but you're not, you know, just a mid-major that's a one-bid league. You're in that weird spot, and that's where Utah State is. So scheduling difficult games, really hard to do. Danny Sprinkles established himself as a pretty good coach, well-regarded. It's a good squad. Utah State's a good team. With TCU, it's struggled as of late, lost 7 of its last 12 coming into the big dance. Jamie Dixon's a good coach. You know, he's been around. I think this will be his 15th NCAA tournament, 15th or 16th. He's done this before. It's a really, really veteran team, so that's something to note. Whereas Utah State, you know, not necessarily super young or anything, but a little bit less so there. But that's what you're looking at if you're Purdue. That's your first weekend, and you know, Utah State doesn't shoot particularly well from 3. TCU doesn't shoot many threes at all. That's, you know, when you look at the way an upset can happen, 3-pointers are a huge part of that. You saw TCU 2 years ago give Arizona a really, really good game in the round of 32 when Arizona was a 1 seed. So it's done it before. TCU does force turnovers really well, but it's worth remembering that those teams that pressure the ball the most aren't the ones that have given Purdue the most problems this year. Purdue's turnovers aren't always, you know, influenced by the opponent. A lot of times it's just Purdue. You look ahead to a potential second weekend, who knows? You get projecting out that far, and things rarely play out as, you know, they look like they will on paper. I think Kansas and Gonzaga are both really vulnerable at the 4 and 5 seed in this region. You look at who they play. I mean, McNeese with Will Wade is dangerous. Will Wade's a good coach, regardless of some of his reputation. Yeah, the guy can coach. That's indisputable. And, you know, I don't know about, Kansas playing Samford. It's a strange matchup a little bit. But, you look at it, and Kansas is dinged up. Kevin McCullough and Hunter Dickinson are both going to give it a go, it seems. But, how healthy actually are they? Gonzaga is just not great this season. This isn't a Gonzaga team like we've seen in some recent years, with Rui Hachimura, Corey Kispert, Jalen Suggs. That's not what you're dealing with Gonzaga this year. Chet Holmgren, not this year's team. So it's entirely possible that, a double-digit seed gets out of that little pod, and it's entirely possible that Kansas looks really good, and you're dealing with a good Kansas team, albeit one that doesn't have a lot of depth. If you're looking ahead, Kansas's health and how good McCullough and Dickinson look is something to keep an eye on. And, if you want to project all the way out to the Elite Eight, do so at your own risk. Tennessee's very good, but it's the Elite Eight. You're probably going to get a really good team in the Elite Eight. That's how it goes. I'd say the same thing with Creighton. It can be really dangerous from outside. I think if you're Purdue, you like the Edey versus Kalkbrenner matchup. But look, that's kind of you deal with that when you get there problem. It's entirely possible that neither of them make it that far. But at that point, it's anyone's guess. You're 40 minutes from the Final Four. Anything can happen there. I just think when you look at Purdue's path here, Purdue's biggest threat is itself. Turnovers are the top concern. We've discussed it all year long. It's not changed. It's not changed one bit. If Purdue does not turn the ball over, Purdue limits itself, under 10 turnovers, takes care of the basketball, Purdue doesn't get beat. In Purdue's in Purdue's losses, I think it's had 14 or more turnovers in all of them. You get up into that number, and with one of the most efficient offenses in the nation, you're just throwing away points. I think it's Purdue averages over 1.2 points per possession. Start adding up the number of points you're giving away, and it makes sense. You're dealing with the NCAA Tournament, which at times you're dealing with really thin margins. Sometimes the difference between advancing and going home is really, really thin. On that note, Purdue's free throw shooting. It's been a little up and down this year. Holistically, Purdue's not a bad free throw shooting team, just based on the numbers. 72% is middle of the pack nationally, but it just doesn't feel like a very great free throw shooting team. Zach Edey's a good free throw shooter. For 7-4, it's as good as you're going to get. But, Purdue just hasn't. It's had its moments where it's struggled at the foul line. And again, the little things add up. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think Purdue's defense is good, but it's not elite. That much is certainly the case. So, if an opponent gets hot, you look at teams who can really attack Purdue in the mid-range with its drop coverage with Zach Edey. That's an area where a team can get really hot and give Purdue problems. At the same time, if you're going to rely on making 2-point jump shots to beat Purdue, well, I think Purdue's going to be happy with that. I think you can deal with that there. Foul trouble, undoubtedly can be a concern for anyone. There's not a team in the NCAA tournament that's comfortable if its team gets in foul trouble. But I certainly think with Purdue, that's the case. Zach Edey is so unique. He is such a unique player that things change so much on both ends of the floor when he's not out there that, Purdue's as impacted as anyone in the nation by foul trouble. With Braden Smith, it's a bit of the same because everything on offense kind of starts with him. He initiates the offense. He does so much in the ball screen game with Zach Edey. He passes the ball so well. Those two get in foul trouble, and things change for Purdue dramatically. But at the end of the day, this is all stuff that Purdue's dealt with all season, and it's 29-4. The turnovers have been something worth monitoring. The free throw shooting's been up and down. The defense hasn't really changed. Foul trouble's been a potential problem, and Purdue's still in a really good spot. The pressure on Purdue is immense here, and I get it. That's not new for this team. It's been there since day one. It's been there since the moment that buzzer sounded. Yeah, not even that. It's been there since about the under 8 timeout against FDU last year. It's handled it really well all season. I think Purdue has handled this as well as you could possibly have hoped for. It's not seemed to linger, the pressure that is. I think Purdue's clearly well aware of some of the pressure that's on it. It hasn't shied away from anything, but Purdue's done a nice job of not making that everything this year. There's a sense of confidence among the team that you get, even in some of these interviews after losses, that you can really tell this team is supremely confident in itself. And that's important. You have to have that in the NCAA tournament. I don't think that's something Purdue necessarily had last year. That's something it has this year. Purdue's either going to do this or it's not. I know that sounds simple to say, but when you look at everything with Purdue going into this, all of the trends, all of the Ken Pom efficiency stuff, everything you could want from Purdue, it checks every box going into the NCAA tournament. And that puts you in a pretty good spot. You have the best player in the country. You have a really good head coach. You have a really good point guard. You go from there. It doesn't guarantee you anything, but it gives you a shot. And that's what Purdue needs, is just a shot. And, I think those first 4 minutes are going to be really, really tense on Friday. I think Purdue's going to come out well, but it wouldn't shock me if Purdue's tight early on. Everyone makes the comparison to 2019 Virginia. What no one wants to talk about is that Virginia was down like double digits at halftime to the 16 seed in 2019 as well. It came back. It overcame it. But that was part of it. And that's something I don't think Purdue will be in that spot, but there's no doubt Purdue's going to feel that pressure when it walks onto the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Friday night. We'll see where it goes from there. But want to get into Q&A here. The first question, would Kansas or Gonzaga be a better Sweet 16 matchup for Purdue? To me, that comes down to the health of Kevin McCullough and Hunter Dickinson. If those two are healthy, I would say Gonzaga, because I don't think Gonzaga has the high-end talent on the roster that Kevin McCullough and Hunter Dickinson provide. But if those two are limited or they're out altogether, then I think Kansas is a better matchup because it's just such a thin team that doesn't play many guys. You get down the list there, and I think that favors Purdue. What's the most intriguing about any of Purdue's possible 4 first weekend opponents? I think TCU just being a really veteran team is interesting. That's something, I think they're, according to Ken Pom, they're number 3 in experience nationally. So that's very noteworthy. With Utah State, that record of 27-6 is very, very strong. It doesn't turn the ball over a ton. It shoots effectively. Its effective field goal percentage is high because it doesn't shoot a lot of threes. It shoots a lot of twos where it's very good. It doesn't shoot a lot of threes because it's not very good at it. With the 16 seeds, with Grambling, it does not shoot well from 2-point range. And admittedly, I just kind of have Ken Pom stuff up here. It doesn't force many turnovers, but it turns the ball over a lot. Wait, excuse me, I'm reading that wrong. It turns the ball over a lot. It does force turnovers fairly well. Not super efficient offensively, though. with Montana State, doesn't get offensive rebounds, shoots fairly effectively, gives up a lot of points, 2-point range, 54% opponents shoot inside the arc. That's not great for Montana State. There's a little something for each of the opponents. What is Purdue's X factor, not named Braden Smith or Zach Edey? If you're looking for a specific player, I think you look towards Lance Jones or Fletcher Lawyer. It's not realistic for both of those guys to be scoring a ton, with Zach Edey scoring a lot and Braden Smith scoring a decent amount. There are only so many shots to go around. But you get one of those guys going, that gives Purdue a really nice trio of scorers. Doesn't have to be the same guy for every game, but one of those guys needs to step up. And just as a whole for Purdue, it's the turnovers. I mean, that's your X factor. When Purdue doesn't struggle with turnovers, it hasn't lost yet this year. Do you think Miles Colvin will get more playing time like the last few games? I'm not really sure what to expect there. It's certainly possible. I still think a decent amount of Miles Colvin getting that initial run in the Big Ten tournament had to do with Braden Smith being in foul trouble, because Purdue needed offense. With Braden Smith off the floor, the offense changes quite a bit, and Purdue needs guys who can score out there. So I think that made a lot of sense to get Miles Colvin out there. If Purdue gets in that spot, where there's foul trouble or it just needs something on offense, I think it makes sense to throw Miles Colvin in there if you think he's ready. What we don't see is practice every day. And guys develop throughout their freshman year outside of game situations. So maybe things are starting to click more for him. If so, that's wonderful for Purdue. He's a guy with a really high long-term ceiling. You want things to come together as much as possible. So I think, though, as a whole, I'd expect the starters and Mason Gillis to get the vast bulk of the minutes. You're to the point here where rest doesn't matter. There is no tomorrow unless you win today. I think Purdue's going to ride those guys pretty heavy. Your Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Lance Jones, Kaufman-Renn, Edey, and Gillis. You'll get Cam Heide in there some. Maybe you get Ethan Morton or Miles Colvin in there a little bit. Caleb First when Edey's off the floor a bit. But I expect Purdue's top six to get the vast bulk of the minutes. Interesting one here. If Purdue wins it all, would it finally shut up the FDU and previous March Madness talk, or does the villain role amplify? This has been one of the weird things here, is Purdue kind of being this villain, according to college basketball Twitter. I think it's more of a Zach Edey thing than it is a Purdue thing, which I still don't understand. I think that is rather ignorant to Zach Edey as a person, just from everything that we know about him, but whatever. It's Twitter. It's not exactly the the center for high IQ discourse. A national championship wouldn't erase the history of what's happened to Purdue in the last 3 NCAA tournaments, but it would really limit the discourse around it, I think. How often do you hear the UMBC thing thrown at Virginia? It's not much, because Virginia went out and won a national title the next year, and there aren't that many programs that can throw stones about national titles. They're hard to win, and Virginia did it. So, if Purdue were to win it all, you'd still hear the occasional FDU quib or, the NCAA tournament struggles, but, Purdue would kind of have redeemed itself there. I think within the Big Ten, Purdue may be establishing that villain role. Purdue's been very good for a while now. Over the last 10 years, except for the year that the Big Ten tournament got canceled, Purdue's been a top 4 seed in the Big Ten every year, Big Ten tournament every year. So, Purdue's had a really nice run of success. I think the Big Ten fans, certainly may view Purdue as more of a villain. Nationally, I think that conversation goes away a little bit regardless. Unless Purdue's just really good again next year, like a top 10 team, which it could be. I don't know that I'd predict it, but it could be. Unless Purdue's in that spot, I don't know that you're going to have that same level of villain role with Purdue, just because the conversation tends to be so centered around the top teams. But that's a good question. That's interesting. A couple here. If Purdue loses in the first round, will Matt Painter still be the head coach next year? Yes, he will still be the head coach. He's not going anywhere. And then if Purdue doesn't at least reach the Sweet 16, where does the program go from here? Is Painter's seat hot? Is Purdue the laughingstock of the NCAA? That would be a really bizarre situation. It would put you in a spot where you almost have an impossible combination of regular season success and postseason failure. If there's ever been a situation like that, I can't think of it. It would truly just be bizarre. And unless I'm forgetting something, unprecedented. But no, I don't think Matt Painter would be on the hot seat. I don't think that's happening. I really don't. So there you go. There's the Q&A. A lot of talk here about the NCAA tournament with the selection committee and the decisions that were made and all of that. I'll never feel bad for a power conference program that gets left out, because you have so many opportunities to prove yourself worthy of inclusion in the NCAA tournament. If it comes down to the wire when you're playing a power conference schedule, then you probably don't deserve it. The NCAA tournament it's a wonderful event. It is the best event in sports. But also, if the purpose of it is to determine the best team, then let's face it, arguing over teams 67, 68, 69, and 70, well, they're probably not the teams that are going to win the national title. So I don't know. I have a lot more sympathy for the Indiana States, because I know those teams can't really schedule insanely difficult out of conference because no one wants to play them. So you're kind of limited there. But, this whole notion that, Greg Sankey's pushing, that you've got to expand the tournament because decent teams are getting left out. No, you don't. That's okay. It's okay that decent teams get left out of the NCAA tournament. That's fine. Not every semi-decent team has to get in. It's okay. I get it. I know where the commissioners are coming from, but it's not worth getting so upset about the bubble teams, because while I get it, for those fan bases, it's a huge difference. It isn't the end of the world in the big picture. I think this year is going to be fascinating because you have three teams that have unequivocally been the best teams throughout the season: Purdue, UConn, and Houston. I mean, it's been since Christmas that we've known that those three are the best teams in the country. Now we're here. They're the top three seeds. It would be rather historic if all three of them made the Final Four. But we'll see. Crazier things have happened. I think it was, 2008 when all 4-1 seeds made it? You never know. But I think that's going to be fascinating to watch. And we're still in the COVID era where you have some of these teams that are just really, really old. So I think that increases the parity. I think that increases the chances of truly madness ensuing. That's what the tournament's about, though. You don't know what's going to happen. It's a blast. There's nothing more fun, just as a pure sports fan, than watching the NCAA tournament. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you guys for spending your time with me. Thank you guys for spending the season with me. It's been a joy. I don't know when we'll be back next. We'll see what Purdue does in the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. Undoubtedly, though, we'll be back here soon with plenty more Purdue basketball to talk about. Follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Send in questions there for the next show. DM them to me, tweet them to me, whichever you prefer. You can also email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, enjoy the madness.